A Quinnipiac poll shows widespread support for President Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus relief proposal. The survey reveals 68% of Americans support the bill as presented by the president, with just 24% in opposition. 78% agree with the president's call for $1,400 stimulus checks. A majority is also in favor of raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. Mr. Biden met with members of both parties this week. He has signaled a willingness for some compromise, but is telling Democrats it's better to go too big than too small. Kirsten Gillibrand is the junior senator from New York. She's a Democrat sitting on the Senate Agriculture, Armed Services, and Intelligence Committees, and she joins me now from Washington. Senator Gillibrand, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you.
So given the vast public support for Mr. Biden's stimulus proposal, should Democrats move forward without worrying about input from Republican lawmakers, or do you see areas where there is still room to come together?
So there's a lot that's bipartisan in the bill already. The stimulus checks are bipartisan. The money for vaccinations and for testing and contact tracing is bipartisan, as well as additional money for food stamps and nutrition. So those are the areas of agreement. The areas where we don't have Republican support are vital, though. We need resources for our frontline first responders, for our teachers and our educators, for all the emergency workers that cities and states pay for. They aren't covered in the Republican proposal, and we need resources for them. So I do believe, because this is so widely supported by all Americans from both parties, that we should move forward as soon as possible. There's urgent need in my state of New York, and I'm sure it's true in all states. So we should move forward quickly to get those resources into our states now.
So New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is urging Congress to provide your state with $15 billion in federal funding, which he says is New York State's, quote, fair share. He's preparing to take legal action if the federal government does not supply those funds, as he laid out last month in the state's budget proposal. Let's play some of that.
If Washington doesn't provide the New York State with our fair share of funding, we're going to pursue litigation. Because I cannot in good faith represent the people of this state and know that they are being harmed and know that they're being treated unfairly, and not do everything within my power to try to do what is right by New York.
And so, Senator, we know Republicans did not include any money for states and cities in that recent counter proposal to the White House's stimulus bill. In your view, is the $350 billion in state and local aid that's in the president's bill non-negotiable? Or is it a piece that could be put aside for now in the interests of having some more bipartisan movement?
I think it is non-negotiable at this point. We've been asking for money for our states and our cities and our counties for the last 9 months, and the Republicans refused to support it. So yes, I think at this point it is non-negotiable. We have to have that as part of this package. And other things like paid leave. We need money for food stamps and pandemic EBT to give resources for basic food on people's dinner tables at night. We need resources for housing. We need resources for first responders and healthcare workers. And we need money for more vaccines. We need to, I think, train a health force so that we can have more workers who are putting shots in arms for states trained by the CDC. That's supported by President Biden as well. So there's a lot that needs to be in this, and I don't think it is a time for half measures. I think it's a time for robust response to grave need.
And you mentioned paid family leave and the work you're doing on that. I want to get to that in just a moment. But first, I want to ask about the federal $15 minimum wage. In your view, is that also a non-negotiable part of the bill? Because while it is popular and certainly has its merits, it isn't necessarily directly related to coronavirus relief. Could that then become a separate piece of legislation?
It could be separate. It's included, I think, in the first bill because it's a reconciliation bill. So it's one where you do things that are budgetary in nature, and it would be appropriate to go in that bill. I support a $15 minimum wage. Our state has led on that. But if you can't guarantee a worker $15 for an hour, then you're saying to the worker, I want you to work for full time, but I want you to be in poverty. It's outrageous. We should have a living wage in this country. And there's no time like the present to do what's right. And so I support including it.
And you've also been pushing for and working hard for paid family leave for a while now. Why do you think this is an important aspect for COVID recovery? And is this something that needs bipartisan agreement to move forward on?
So right now in the COVID relief bill, it's just the pandemic paid leave. So it's just tax credits for employers to offer paid leave now so that a person doesn't have to be fired. If they have to stay home because their child's school isn't open, or because they have COVID, or a family member has COVID and they need to take care of that family member, that is necessary. But if we had had paid leave as a national benefit before this pandemic, it would have been so much easier to help people. We could have funded paid leave fully. People wouldn't have lost their jobs. They would have been able to stay home when they needed to. And there would have been the infrastructure that's necessary to keep the economy going. We are the only industrialized country in the entire world that doesn't have access to national paid leave. So it's needed, and it would help us protect against the next pandemic. So I'm hopeful that while we probably will only include a smaller version of paid leave, a pandemic version of paid leave, I'm hoping that one of the first bills we can actually pass into law is a national paid leave bill.
And I know that's something you've been working on for a while, Senator. I want to talk a little bit about the reconciliation process, because obviously Republicans have used it as recently as 2017 when they passed tax cuts with a simple majority. They used it unsuccessfully when they tried to enact an Affordable Care Act repeal. So Democrats are not breaking with precedent in these efforts. But even so, do you fear long-term consequences of having Congress operate in this fashion where the majority party has virtually unchecked power?
You know, the Republicans used reconciliation for a close to $1.9 trillion tax cut. So I would rather be able to use it now for the same amount of money to help people, to go straight into the hands of people who are suffering and need support. Those tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and the largest businesses were not money well spent. It should have been spent on the middle class. Middle class families need tax cuts, not the wealthy. And now we have to spend about the same amount of money just in urgent relief. So I think while it's a shame that this isn't bipartisan right now, I believe the issues that we are going to fight for will be. So hopefully it's just something we needed to use for this urgent crisis.
And Senator, you are introducing the Reopen and Rebuild America's Schools Act, which would commit $130 billion in federal funding to public schools. Tell us what this proposal would do. And is this something you would also be willing to push through the reconciliation process if Republicans don't get on board?
So what the bill does is give resources to schools to upgrade their systems so they can have kids come back to school. So many schools don't have HVAC systems or air ventilation systems that can accommodate a safe classroom. They've been putting off repairs for too long, so you can't get clean air and be able to assure that people aren't going to spread COVID. So these resources would be used for that. They could also be used for telecommunications equipment. So to the extent some kids don't have access to tablets or internet or remote learning, that it would make that universally available and make sure that every school has access to Wi-Fi so that internet access becomes a basic human right for all of our students. So those are the kinds of things that bill can be used for, and it could easily be included in the first reconciliation package for COVID relief, since the whole point is to get schools open so parents can go back to work so we can get the economy moving again. And we should have safe schools. And to do that, you need testing, contact tracing, good facilities, the ability to spread kids out, and lots of masking, and eventually vaccinations.
But would you like to follow that up with legislation addressing the school system in general, sort of beyond COVID era?
Yeah, I think COVID really shone a light on the inequities in our education system. I mean, how many kids were left behind throughout New York because they didn't have access to the internet or a computer? Lots of kids in inner cities, lots of kids in rural areas. And we found that high-speed internet isn't available everywhere. How many kids had to do remote learning in a parking lot of a school or library because they didn't have internet at home? I mean, these are the real challenges. And so, yes, we should be focused on equity, investment in all communities for education. And we should be creating better facilities so in the next pandemic, we are able to keep schools open.
Well, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.